어래랑 난 니바 양은주 기생이 가르치버려 람나다 되네요. 양은주 단주기 류딘디게단 된차와다 제게 단주 류딘 뭐 신고 제제 근데 다와제나 저 주사와 단주 류딘에서 근데 단주 류딘디에는 된차와레 땡텔이야 탈바다 탐지견 바다 지게 개와치면 하다 미고 원토에 경원요 고원토야 안탈바 탈비고 고원토야 탐지견 고원토야 람님네 간데 제비나 제 투여기다 땡케바 진지리에 세세 된차와레 사지 나디에 된차와레 대디안에 지게 녀가와레스 당아지 제사디 녀가와 임비 김제 가르스네 안단주 류딘디 토야 토발이야 는 규리 주비야 갈래카보레스 가스는 규디 수림 남바다고 소야다 네 짐바다 쇠바다 준주 네 말람 짐바메바 삼자와 데네진의 규사고 오래 데네 제산 대줄리데 톱가와레스 제가 디네 삼다제다 아주 류딘디 denju ludire dawa kedan jo jusawadire 제가 된체와데 딘델이야 냠네 가르치는 지투고래 제가 디네게자 디링 디네게 토에데 빼가와 상모 야고 슈치레샤 제가 딘델이야이 안제 냠네 기림바디게 제 야고 지긴세 베다 셈쇼게야다 안드바게야데 데네시오 오래상한데 그게다 된체와단 어디 톱가와 임비 금제로 데네시는 그센티 슈사로와다.
Good evening. So we've completed a first portion of the text where we are about to start tonight, and the Tibetan starts with second major component of the text. So what we've just finished looking at is the recognition of this precious human rebirth that we have all attained. And to come to recognize just what a truly fortuitous opportunity we have achieved, one first was guided to come to recognize the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments that we've achieved, to recognize or identify that these freedoms and endowments, all 18, have been fully accomplished. Moreover, we looked at the great importance of having such a precious human rebirth marked by these freedoms and endowments. Primarily that, independent on this rebirth, we can cultivate within all the mental paths required to progress towards and eventually achieve either liberation from suffering or enlightenment itself. This is the great value of this life. But this life, though, the third outline, we should see is not something to take for granted, not something to see as ordinary, because it is so difficult to obtain. And we came to recognize that in different ways, one of which was through seeing how difficult it is to accumulate fully the causes that lead to such a precious human rebirth. Principally is the cultivation of excellent ethics, as well as the accompanying causes of generosity, patience, and joyous perseverance, as well as prayer. All of these are required to achieve this fully fledged human rebirth. So, going through the meditations as we have for the last couple of months on this chapter, we come to recognize just truly how fortunate I am to have this opportunity, and a determination will arise not to let it go to waste, but to make the very most of what one has achieved. And this is to be reflected in how to train one's mind to make a concerted effort to transform our very way of thinking.
안다 가르쳐 오라세네 다 닝보len고 그래서 닝보len서다 이제 닝보셔야되라 다 닝보들 제부 닝보의 약보 닝보선다 완전 디나네 약보도 시고라 약셔듬 시시고라다 지난 제부 닝보 디 규 닝보서 자기로 닝보서야 약보 부이다보 약보 시고라다 완전 베네다 지게 신도를 내 신도기다 닝보세데 디나데 약쇼세야지 다 잘라네 잘라 닝보세데 디나데 약쇼세 고고로 진짜 당한 저기 지진이 감들이야 디기다 통수 디기 망보여 와다 이나다 디기 닝보세야지 샤고로 진짜 되네 자다 닝보랭고레스 닝보데 가래라나다 저기 타르도 근데 제 탈바다 탐지킨 벽고 더야 되다 땡기 대화 차고 뒤토바는 아주 그디나 디기나 디기냐 차고로 와서 닝보 제부 닝보 탈바 탐지킨 벽고 디기에네 디윤유 닝보대야 대토지게 탑람 냠렌지야데 다규 닝보 차고 제자는 닝보 랭고로 해서도 다 땡기 탈바 가서래 녜레디 토비야기 된다라 유 안에 말 가르고고에는 디규디 냠렌 제고로 해서 녜랭고로 해서 당아서 당한 주길에 다들 깨어만 냠랭이 똑바르게 깨어 말아 마게 와서다 주 검제 깨버지 렘바스고로다 어두세나 냠랭 제고로 해서 닝보 랭고로 해서다 녜레 토비야기 유 안에 냠랭 개위 냠랭디게 제고로 해서 저거다 닝보 렘바스
The chapter we've just finished has these three primary outlines. So having reflected on them, firstly, coming to recognize that we've achieved all of the 18 freedoms and endowments. Secondly, recognize their great value. And thirdly, that because they are so difficult to obtain, we shouldn't see this life, this rebirth, as something ordinary, something to thereby take for granted. Rather, we should recognize just how valuable this life is by seeing its potential. And by recognizing its potential, the fact that we recognize its potential is expressed by striving to take the essence or fulfill its potential. And that is the next part of the text we come to now, how to fulfill its very potential. So we don't have this in English, but it's the major section that one starts with now, how to fulfill the potential of achieving this life, or the Tibetan is literally how to take its essence. And taking its essence, fulfilling its potential, is expressed in the accumulation of the causes that will lead to the attainment of the potential that this life presents us. In other words, progressing towards the attainment of liberation and enlightenment. So the fulfillment of the potential of this precious human rebirth refers to striving to cultivate the causes that lead to the great results of liberation or enlightenment. And by doing so is an expression of our recognition of the value of what we've achieved, this precious human rebirth.
아디네자다 닝불레나 시에도다 닝불레에 대한 아주 기호숨게 남기를 바냠는 제산으로 대시에도다 델레야 안에 람지 남샤 라 녜바게바스르다 람지 남샤라 녜바게바 델레 닝불레베 수용어소세 나지스 사체마소노고 니송도와 람지 남샤 녜바 남샤라 녜바게바 델레 닝불레베 수 그래서 다 가상은 막원마 진짜 남지 남자라 녜바게바스 니발라 남지 남자라 녜바게바 델라니 볼림부 술ung어서세 안디니체 나모.
So now turning to the text, so in the published book it's on page 67, and in the handout, the e-book, it's on page 76. So the path of the three types of persons is the name of the chapter, or the full title in Tibetan of the chapter is how to practice the paths of the three types of persons. And this then starts with the way to take the essence of this life endowed with freedom, which has 2 points. Firstly, generating certainty with regard to the general presentation of the path, and secondly, the actual way of taking its essence. So that only comes right at the very end of the chapter.
람지 남샤라 녜바게바라 되다 람지 남샤 냠는지 림바데 녜바게바스다 야보하고 세우르다 가르 냠는지고 가르치고 그베 야보하고 해야 돼서 녜바게바스 람지다네 안 람긴 지기 냠는지 남샤텔이야 디 하고 내가 깨봐서도 야 뭐지 다디 냠네 디디지레서 하고 와대서 그런 내가 깨봐서.
The first outline that we'll look at, generating certainty with regard to the general presentation of the path. The generating certainty refers to coming to understand or know very well that one has know very well the general presentation of the path. So generating certainty or understanding clearly.
나 가르카레 가네스 냠는 레고 가르 냠는 지고 봐 야야부터 하고서는 되는 데를 니볼렘 바시더니 니볼렘 송어서서 냠는 제상 뭐디 뭐네 마 냠는 제상 좀 받으시고 와다 니버디.
Therefore, so the full title of this chapter is How to Practice the Paths of the Three Types of Persons. That is the very meaning of this chapter here. And by knowing this well, we will be able to take the essence or fulfill the potential of this precious human rebirth.
anda delaya nangju lamji namsha ngebaje de la khoya de ya ande rimba tangbo ni she de tangbo ni se ro ni ane garasne jewo sumge lamji lam도 송랍 탐제 두위 추유세 직체 되네 jewo sumge 거네 ane rimba 신도 티비 금센된 바세제 니 송거다.
This first outline then has 2 points. How all the Buddha's teachings are contained in the paths of the three types of persons, which is immediately below. In a couple of pages, it starts with the reason for its gradual guidance from the perspective of the three types of persons. Now, just to say now as a translator, there are 2 errors that in the written translation that's made throughout this chapter. So where we have this terminology, gradual guidance. So gradual is mistaken. You'll see it in other Lamrim text. It should be either sequential or progressive or stages. So on the cover of the text we have their stages. So in the Tibetan Lamrim, this is the rims, the stages of the path. So it should be graduated, not gradual. This is a mistake made in other translations and throughout here. So where it says gradual later, just change it to stages or sequence or graduated. And then the word guidance isn't quite right. It's more explicitly a verb, as in to guide or to lead. So it's not, because guidance has the implication of being advice that you can choose to follow. That's not what's being done. One can rather have the image of the teacher taking the student by the hand and guiding them on in how to cultivate the path within. Because to guide or to lead means to teach and thereby guide the student how to cultivate the path within. So again, you'll see again and again this word guidance. Understand it's really the verb to guide or to lead. So those 2 errors are repeated a lot.
아니네 나 기보 숨기 람도 안 송라 탐지 두위 추시대 다 송라 탐지 다 상예기 송기 최 간에 송부이네 냠내기 림바디 기보 숨기 람기를 냠 림바나래 뒤르고 레제래 뒤고 레제래 기보 숨기 람기 람도 송라 탐지 두위 추시대 제사 상예기 송비기 최 간에 신의 송바 차사 가르 송고르스네 샘쟁이 야 디기 주야다 동아세야다 디기 주야다 나라 숨고로와 지산 디쳐서 송야디 다 냠내 리바디 기부 숨기 기부 중요 남이리바 나 냠내 제다다 기부 중다 냠내 제다 기부 아니 쳔베 람 냠내 림베 나라야 뒤르고라 디나네 마주바 지야 요마레서 오다 기부 숨이 람도 송랍 탐시 뒤에 수유셔야 돼.
The outline we'll come to now, how all the Buddha's teachings are contained in the paths of the three types of persons. So the entirety of the Buddha Dharma is contained in this graduated sequence of trainings that are found within the three types of persons. It's an expression of the various means by which to achieve happiness and overcome suffering and problems. And it's presented in the various trainings that are shared with the practitioner of small or initial capacity, as well as thereafter, built on that, the training shared with the practitioner of intermediate or medium capacity, and then thirdly, the trainings which are unique to a practitioner of great capacity.
Gabriel and Yawachima Lada Muko Toyag Donalaya, and Sumba, the tablet Sumba, Gabriel and Tamji Nakaza Tarbioko Toyag to Sumba, Gabriel Sanjiko want to reach the Lam Yamni Rimbason Shava, Chazan, Sanji Sun Chazada, Sanji Sunyaki, Geshe de la Carit Nusungu Sena, and the Anna Mundio want to reach to Yamnja Rimbason Yada, Anna Tarbi go want to reach to Lam Yam Rimbasona, Anna and Sanji go want to reach to Yamna Rimbasona, Chazan, Di Yamado, Shen Dineshi, Dineka Mevaje. Yamareja, Sanji Sumbi Chaza, Di Geshe Thubten Rabten, and Chigi Simja Dunga said, and Digi to be a Gitanda Sungorwa. Dinizan, Simji Digi to be at the Dunga said, Negaki Digi, Lada Muko Toyada, and the Tardu, and Nengele Kotoyadi, Di Dundakanga Sungorage, Chesa Diniza, give us some Lamgi, and Tamji Duru, said Dutan Sungorwada.
The teachings from the Buddha will have varying topics. Some of those topics will be within the context of how to cultivate the causes that lead to a further excellent rebirth. Other teachings from the Buddha, those topics will present how to cultivate the causes that lead to liberation from suffering. And thirdly, other topics of the Buddha's teachings lead to how to attain the omniscient state of enlightenment. Those three topics then will encompass the entirety of the Buddha's teachings. So in other words, the entirety of the Buddha's teachings are contained within the presentation of the three types of persons.
And and give you Lamrim by the Mason, Dene, and they tell my Lobsang. They also Yawacha, Dene, give you Tinga Lamrim Balia, Lobsang George T. Dene, and they Yawacha, didn't give you Chimber Lamrim Balia, Chihuahua, Tinga Lamrim Nalia to Chidu and Chica Lamdre Nalia, and Sungarwa, Dene Zada, Chisa Rimbashin the party, the Chihuahua. Chisa the Rimbashin Chihuahua, Gumze Yorbes, Gumze or Esorda. Ekashida, Bendigo, Merton, Davo, Kiwu Chimbio, Lamrim by Yamna Gendigua, Kiwu Chung, the Jinda, District Lamna Lobsang Chehoma, Majevaji Kiwu Chimbio, Lamrim by Lobsang Digua, some Lungurua, and then Deza, De Go Gio Martin, Dambo, Kiwu Chung, Lamrim by the Lamdren Namlia, and Dustia, Deniki Wujing Lamir by Deniki Wuchimba Lamira Chiedi, Chiguadi, Denig Rimbaj and Sunguadi, Gumse or S, and the Gumsendema, Chile Shigua, the Gumsen Tempa, said this morning.
So all the teachings of the Buddha, which are all the teachings of the Buddha are contained within the trainings associated with the three types of persons. And so therefore, one needs to start with the training shared with the practitioner of initial capacity, and independence on one's mind being developed through giving rise to those teaching, to that level of training within. Then one is qualified to embark on the training shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity. And when those have been cultivated within, then one has the sufficient basis to actually engage in the trainings of a person of great capacity. And these then, that entirety, the sequence of those of trainings associated with each of the three different types of persons is what encompass the graduated stages of the path to enlightenment. In other words, the Lamrim. So that one needs to train in that specific sequence, starting at the beginning, progressing in a graduated stage, graduated manner throughout all the stages. This is established based on reasons. These reasons need to be well understood. Otherwise, a practitioner will make the error of rather striving in what interests them, what they are drawn towards, rather than training in the correct sequence. If one trains in the correct sequence, the desired result will follow. So to encourage one to train in the correct sequence from the outset, reasons are presented.
Andade Tsongkhapa tamje da jiwosumye lamina Tsongkhapa dubi gumtseni de masungorwa da sangye gi dangbo ni dangbo sewa da sangye gi tomor tu gyeba dang sa jesa tu gyeba da bardu cho sa ba da tarngomo so ba ngombor so ba sangye ba tamje semjen khone dundu yimbe chöso ba tamje yang semjen khone dundu den dubar semje khona semje yu den khona dubar jeba os.
Turning to the text, how all the Buddhist teachings are contained in the paths of the three types of persons. Everything the Buddha did was only for the welfare of sentient beings, from generating the mind of enlightenment in the beginning, through collecting the accumulations in the middle, to manifesting complete Buddhahood at the end. Thus, all his Dharma teachings are only for accomplishing the welfare of sentient beings.
제가 상이유 토모로 두 개바 세대 대한 심제는 두 개바 레서 다 장주 셈 개바 세고라 두 개바세는 제가 당한주 당보 장주 셈 개바라 당보 안에 심제 고위 제 심제를 엔지기 되게 주나 셈비게 잠바 공유하다 심제 저 고위 동아 용수의 통제네 안 심제도 동아다 차고도 셈비게다 동아다 잔나 셈비 니지게 근데 심제 남제 동아다 자와 대한 의지기 심제 동아다 제해지양 심제 탐지 디기로 꾸긴 셈비게다 데네게 삼당 데네게 로 저게 가소를 하삼남다게 대인자다 심제 탐지 동아의 저 고려 동아를 죄야 타바다 탐지기 먹고 볼로 고발라 탑초도 주버데 상기레시다 상기 고바마선 탑문우 대장의 심제 탐지도 상기 고바 토벌쇼 셈베게다 데네진의 장주심 개바 두 개바라도 토발 장주심에 두 개요 기도 갑라 제산 심쟁이 된다라 삼다지 두 개바를 해서지 상기유 안에 상기 예마 당보 다 장주심바 장주심 마게 녀래 당보 장주심 개요도 안에 개디 안에 랑기 된다 마인 바제 심진이 동화세다 심진이 디유주비에 된다라 두께바를 와서 월다 상이에 도말 안에 두께바다 하세 상이에 도말 두께바데 심진이 된 거네 해야지.
From the Tibetan starts with our second line, from generating the mind of enlightenment in the beginning. So the mind of enlightenment, or in Sanskrit bodhicitta, this is referred to here as the beginning, because this is the point of entry. Uncontrived bodhicitta is the point of entry into the paths of the bodhisattva. And it's the paths of the bodhisattva that lead to the attainment of enlightenment, of Buddhahood. So to generate bodhicitta, one will have reflected intensely on one's own situation, recognizing the suffering that one is subjected to and its causes, and given rise to a determination to emerge from such suffering. But then, in addition to that, one lifts one's gaze from one's own suffering position and recognizes that all other ordinary beings are in exactly the same position, suffering in the same ways and for the same reasons. Then the practitioner intentionally strives to focusing on the situation of others, to generate compassion for them, the deep yearning for them to be free of suffering and its causes, and develop love for them, wanting them to abide in lasting happiness. And in these two minds of compassion and love, developing them to the point of wholehearted resolve, where the practitioner takes personal responsibility for fulfilling that aspiration. They take responsibility to guide beings, to cultivate the transformation of their own minds so as to gain freedom from suffering and abide in lasting happiness. So this is the cultivation of wholehearted resolve. But the practitioner then recognizes that they are still too limited to actually fulfill that. the practitioner hasn't even fulfilled their own needs. How can they really guide others successfully? The only being who really can do so perfectly is a Buddha. Then the determination comes. In order to help others gain freedom from suffering, I must become a Buddha. This then, when it's uncontrived, is the generation of actual bodhicitta. This is where the determination to become a Buddha comes from. Hence, it is presented as being the very beginning of the path to Buddhahood. And we have here, at the start of the Tibetan, from generating the mind of enlightenment in the beginning.
Dene ane janshu semge saweje chane dene ane bardo soksaba sido chisan bardo ya ane jimbe nyamne ane jige janshu semge janshu sembe domba song dene ane jimbe nyamne tsure nyamne sube nyamne dene zunjuge nyamne ane samten domba yi dobe shera kumya la soba dene ge dan sosuge nyamne jia dan shen semje gila chue den shen semje dunga jige digi juya dan din shan liya gawa sa juye dene jawa bado meba so bado meba jige sunum saba sayati so saba di chasane semjen dondale 지나다 소소랑게 진바도 수련 수업 전전냠 삼제 파신적인 냠네 제와디 semja 탐지게 되는 거 상기 고모 토고도 상기 도바 토발라 안 남냠는 디치는 토고스 베게 디던달에 냠는 지고서 안 semj게 된달에 근데 조사바래 해서지 지산 조사바래 semj게 되는 사바래 해서
Then at the beginning, having generated uncontrived bodhicitta and entered into the paths of the bodhisattva continues through the text continues through collecting the accumulations in the middle. This then refers to now being a bodhisattva. The bodhisattva will receive the vows of the bodhisattva, and in order to ensure they are protected well, will strive in the perfections. And being a bodhisattva, engaging the perfections means that they'll be practicing, for example, generosity, in order to accumulate causes to become a Buddha, in order to help others ever more. And they'll practice ethical restraint and patience and joyous perseverance, concentration and wisdom, all conjoined with bodhicitta, hence perfections. And that means each of those practices they engage in order to benefit beings as well as to spiritually develop so that they can become a Buddha and help others evermore. And this is the process of accumulating virtue. The primary focus of the bodhisattva is on benefiting others. The method of benefiting others is very vast, but this can be condensed down into the 6 perfections. So the 6 perfections are an expression of the wish to benefit others. Through expressing that, they accumulate vast stores of merit, all which helps them fulfill their intention of both benefiting others and progressing towards enlightenment.
디난마 탐지에서 도 탐지 심지어 권유에 된도 인비에서 탐지에서 디디 강이 데 이번에 전주심에서 토말 아니 투기야바 토말 투 전주심겨 투기야바 바도 소사바 몸바서바 상기야바 탐지에서 디술려고다 디지 강리아 투기야바 라마도 심지어 된도 모스마송을 와지다 투기야바 바도 소사바 몸바서바 상기야바 탐지에서 디숨가다 상마 아니 심지어 권유 된도리에서
The bodhisattva continues with the engaging in the acts of a bodhisattva leading to the accumulations, coming to then the conclusion of their training, which here is manifesting complete Buddhahood at the end. So this is then the attainment of Buddhahood, their long-sought goal. And the Tibetan then concludes with what we have at the beginning. Everything the Buddha did was for the welfare of sentient beings. This then was the this was the dominant motivation of the bodhisattva throughout their training, from the very initial stages right throughout the middle, and then with the attainment of Buddhahood, this remained their motivation to benefit sentient beings, or to enact the welfare of sentient beings.
상계 전에는 상계 최 송바디죠. 최 송바 탐제 장세 최 송바 탐제게 지도 최다다다 배능한 저기 최고 당보 니버 송바세다 안지게 네야 즉 최고 숨 마디베다 최 지망고 송여로 와다 배능 아이고 송하다 되니기 지 최망고 송야 차산 간에 송바의 최 탐제 송바 탐제 샘진 권이 된주버 제바오 제자 샘진 권하게 샘진 된주베 샘지게 된주베 샘진 권이 된주바시다 권아스도 랑게 된규네 매바제 자스 강송바 샘진이 된다 주베게 된야게 탑람 땜바사 장야리죠 샘진 권은 저기 된도니에 된다지요로와 디된다 주베게 된다려야 탑람 땜셔바 장야리에 송거를 제래 샘진 권이 된주바 제바오스
The text continues. Thus, all the Buddha's Dharma teachings too are only for the accomplishing the welfare of sentient beings. Because having become a Buddha, as we see in the very first line, everything that the Buddha does was for the welfare of sentient beings. Now we see here, thus all his Dharma teachings too are only for the welfare of sentient beings. So the Tibetan, the beginning of the first line and the sentence, thus all his Dharma teachings, they follow after each other. So it makes it explicitly clear that every single teaching the Buddha gave, whether from the vast classes of sutra teachings or the classes of tantric teachings, all of them were solely done in order to benefit others. And we should understand then when it says, for the welfare of sentient beings, it means the focus is solely on others, in that the Buddha is not, or Buddhas are not counted amongst sentient beings. It is, so therefore, all the teachings are to help others.
코나 주비치도 송바레스 데다 이나시도 데다 나시도 샘징기 되는 코나 주비치 송바이나 안 샘징기 줍자 샘징이 되는데라 가려레스데 줍자 샘징이 되니 니데 샘징이 되는데라 니여레스 니데 가르스네 내가 온도다 타도 녜레 니들이 해주래
Lama Tsongkhapa then continues, that being so. So that being so refers to that every teaching the Buddha gave was to benefit others. That being so, the goal to be accomplished is the welfare of sentient beings, which has two levels. Has two levels. The temporary one of higher states. So this you'll know from elsewhere as higher status, but higher status is good. The temporary one of higher states, and the ultimate, or here final, is perhaps better, the final one of definite goodness.
지사다 심쟁기 되는 가래에서도 심쟁을 고야기 된다데 가래에서도 심쟁 고야디 디기로 와다 심쟁 고야디 강하게 매바시 디기여야 들어와 지사 심쟁이 되는디 디기리에다 된다라 심쟁기 디기리에 심쟁을 디기도 보고 디기리에서 심쟁 고런을 가르고서 디기고래시 지사 디기여야 될이야 아니 내가 원도당 것을 타르도 녜려서 타르바다 탐지기 보고는 띵기 되어들이었다. 대조어디다. 띵기 되어 조고. 이나데디 내가 타르바다 탐지기 보고 토마는 녜려 마토비 빨아들라 내가스 디 마토비 링들라 야 디기 고고로 와다. 지산 디기 고고면서 나 손을 깨봐이나 디기 매바지. 내가 손을 타르지네. 원dio 고고 토바이네. 원디기 띵 될이야. 아니지 디기 야지 내가 나 손을 되네. There's Yaru Digi, Jiglusim Digi Yaji Gobaza, Tutu Yobaza, Chesada, Semjingi, doing what they got Digiris, Digi Delana, Nerap Yungo, Wandio go top 10 delia, Digi Yoya Digi Jungores, and Dele, Yaga, and the Garswater, Nele said Tomodu, Dingy Deonoya Chakor, Chesa Dini Matoya Marache, Chesa Semjele Digi, Digi Chita. 띵기 디기 마도나 디네가링이 디기 디니마도 요아 메르와 제자데 셈칭이 된다 주에 디니레 소르다 내가 병 내가 원투기 라다 미고바 톱제 디델이야 디기요 디기 직제 원도고 봐지 아니 타르도 근데 띵기 대화 돼야 돼 내래 스리디나 타르바다 탐지기 보고 봐 니가 얘기를
What's been emphasized by Lama Tsongkhapa here is that everything the Buddha has done has been to fulfill the welfare or the needs of beings. And and what is the need of beings? Or what is it that sentient beings long for? It's happiness. A state of being that is completely freed of problems, suffering and difficulty. And in particular, the happiness that we all yearn for is lasting, uninterrupted happiness. Not just temporary happiness, but lasting, stable happiness. So this is what beings long for, and that lasting, stable happiness is the final one of definite goodness. So here, final is a better translation than ultimate, because it's a different word than, for example, an ultimate truth. And it's final as in long-term, as opposed to temporary, which we have at the beginning, or final or lasting happiness of definite goodness. It is never interrupted by even a moment of suffering. But to attain such a state usually takes many lifetimes. Therefore, the Buddha also taught how to achieve temporary happiness. So this we had before, the temporary one of higher states. So higher states refers to the higher rebirths, which are more preferable than those of the lower rebirths, where there is at least some degree of temporary happiness. So this is temporary particularly refers to the temporary happiness of the higher states as stepping stones to the attainment of the final or the long-lasting, uninterrupted happiness of definite goodness.
Sandan semjingi digi duwege digi de desen da nima do ngondu ko wa top je dendele digi yada ane tardu ngele tarbada tamje kimyo toyad ma do dinye do semjingi dendi dirwada chedan dinyi ma do me baza sanje chue garu sonbene dinyi toyage dondal sonyo re so di dinyi bene ngondu ko wa top toye top je dendele digi duwada tablo sonsha yoda dine ya je tarbi ko wa top tobi do tablam 송샤교 네 타르도 탐지kim에 산요고방 토예기 tablam 송샤교 냠네 림바 송샤교 냥냐레 다 산유 쉬송에 제가 디마도 현대 산지기 최송에 디난 디네지 된달 마송바 산지기 최강해요 말해서다.
So therefore, the entirety of the teachings that the Buddha gave were to achieve one or both of these goals. The temporary one of higher status and the final one of definite goodness. So there are these two levels or two divisions to the goal to be accomplished for sentient beings. The goal or the welfare, it's the same word, to be accomplished for sentient beings has these two types, that of the temporary happiness of higher states or the lasting happiness of definite goodness.
산지기 소예게 최근에 소변나 타르도 미유디 산지기 타르투바데 semjen 탐제 산주고방 토야 된다는 소리가 양야시. 지난 당도 기부 중요히 남지 림바지 남자데 semjel에 숭구여변에 무엇보다 기부 중요히 남지 림바 권 냠내제데 개와치말 문디오 고방 토비게 된다라 람냠내 림바지 숭고르와 이내 타르도 디가선 산주고방 다데고 문디오 고방 토 덴델얀 gelegen 아직 곧 탈바나 탐지기 보고 냠내 고갑래 데니기 고갑래야게 두셔라 데니 안 자주심배 냠내지 탈산요 고마 토야게 다 미유 탈도 산지기 최가데 소만나 탈도다 미유디 산요 고마 토베지 송아 짱야 최고래.
And whilst the goal to be accomplished for the welfare of sentient beings has these two divisions, really the Buddha only has a focus on one of them, and that is to lead beings to attain the final state of enlightenment, of Buddhahood itself. And that is the case even where the teachings are explicitly about achieving temporary happiness of higher status, of higher states, of a good rebirth. You could maybe express it as, at the back of the Buddha's mind is the long-sighted view of, through guiding beings to achieve further good rebirths, I will then be able to guide them further to achieve enlightenment. So the actual goal of the Buddha is to guide beings to cultivate the causes within that lead to their own enlightenment. But recognizing that this will take lifetimes, the Buddha often explicitly taught the trainings associated with achieving further good rebirths, so that the practitioner can continue for lifetimes progressing towards the attainment of the final state, the state of enlightenment.
당보 주발에 잠대 당보 주발 원dio 구방 토비하게 된다라야 아니 봐 될이야 디 된다리와 송야 될 시월 당보 주발에 잠대 진예 송바 탐제니에서 최근에 송여바냐 로다 원dio 구방 토비하게 된다리야 최근에 송여바 탐제에서 진예 송바 탐제니 아니 기부 충원의 삼 기부 충원다 투모의 최고도 뒤에서 안에 가서리다 되네 마제 안기부 충 기부 충이 캐버졌니 나디 디바도 신이를 딜러셔는 뒤에서 돼 기부 충원다 투모의 꼴도 뒤에서 돼.
So now continuing to the next paragraph, which now presents how to go about achieving higher realms or further excellent rebirths. All the teachings that pertain to accomplishing the first level are included in the cycle of Dharma teachings for the person of genuine or actual lesser spiritual capacity, or that is shared in common with a person of lesser capacity.
지사다 당보 주발에 잠대에서 당보세대 기부 충의 남예림바 단 디 기부 충을 하다 명원dio 고방 토예게 된다라 송셰비게 최근에 송바이나야 디 송비게 최디게 자사 직진아 근데 기부 충의 기부 충의 삼시되다 기부 충을 하다 미우 고방 토예 기바치마 하다 미우 고방 잠 토예게 된다 송샤바 최정의 차기를 해야지 기부 충의에서 왜 삼세 되네 야나 안에 기부 충분한 투모의 걸 손에 책을 했어. 저기 그 토비에 이미 투모 것을 토비에 고방 토비에디 탐지 김에 산지 고방 토비에 된다라 임바지라 아니 디 냠렌디 기부 충 냠렌 지다나 하신 진열이야 롭존시에디 걸 손에 디걸데 뒤로 디니마도 요 말해서다 기부 충 하다 미우 고방 토비에 된다라 냠렌지 제고래 손에디 야나 그런 강사디 교치 말하다 미고마 잠 도비가 된다 손시하겠지 야나 근데 델레 아니 녀레 기부 충원도 델하다 미고마 토예가 된다래 남냠렌지 되네 뜻이 알조디 되네 타바 탐지기 미고마 토예게 남냠렌지 림바 제하게 디고 된다 손발해서 니 디날마 디마도 요 말해서 디엔 뒤로 그래야지.
All the teachings that pertain to accomplishing the first levels. The first level refers to then of the three types of persons. This is the first of the three types, a person of small or initial capacity, are included in the cycle of Dharma teachings for the person of genuine lesser spiritual capacity, so that's one, or that is shared in common with a person of lesser capacity. So someone of genuine lesser spiritual capacity differs from the second type that is shared in common with the person of lesser capacity. So someone of genuine lesser capacity can also be called someone of lesser spiritual capacity alone. So in other words, they are engaging in these trainings, they are engaged in these practices of training their mind only for the goal associated with a practitioner of initial capacity, in other words, to achieve a good rebirth. That is their motivation. They want to achieve a further good rebirth. They don't want to fall into the lower realms in the next life. And that is their motivation, and that is their motivation alone for engaging in the practices of, in the trainings of a practitioner of initial capacity. So their motivation is just to get a good rebirth. Hence, they are someone of genuine lesser spiritual capacity or an actual lesser spiritual capacity. The second type that is shared in common with a person of lesser capacity. This refers to someone who has the greater goal of full and complete enlightenment. But they know that in order to eventually achieve that goal of enlightenment, they need to engage in those same trainings, those that are shared in common with the person of lesser capacity. So the trainings between these two types of practitioners are the same. What is vastly different is their motivation for engaging in them. That first type is just looking for a good rebirth. The second type is engaging in those practices which are in common, but for a very different motivation, to achieve enlightenment.
Nagibu chung mo se di da dengan joge da gasa jiorwa da ko chue nyamne jingen jiorwa horong de samna la ya jewa chima lada mi ngondio go wan togu gudu senbige di topdigu dönye gu dünba yobaje tarbasa da tamji kemase dingi toptugu marase be denige sam tobyage dyoba medigen da dönye medigen che ane jibu da jewa chima lada mi ngondio go wan togu gudu senbige da denige samlo yodige gasa jiorwa dele kibo chung se orda jesan delya da denigi dyoba yen gasa delya on jono da ane lunga isnye jide be surim sungore ane jimbe nyamna chewore ane soba komugore ane zonde som고 세다 ane jige molam jawore se dene sun pa sunya ane ji nduchine ane jige denju gu lüden se dige za chimbo samda da ane dene ane ji chiwa mitaba samda da ane chue nyamne de ane ji dadene je hudu sembe samda odu sunyamne chewore se di sunya di garis tingosne denju duen chewa danju ane jige danju lüden danju duen chewa de ge pas danju to be gu ane lü gasor churim soya jimbe nyamne sebe nya zunle nyamne ane de molamja desuba sungorwa di soya ge chede da jibu chung zamgi chue so da de karson koron meni gasa koron ge kunol ya 개워치말 하다 미고봉 짬지 토도고 마도 딜라 탈바 탐지 키모고 토야게 되바스 삼단고 말어 지다 그런 삼나라 기부 충 짬지 개워치말 하다 미고봉 짬 토바 되고래 델레 기부 충 세워로 와다 저 토바도 세상 델야다 상이게 최송도 이제단 그런이야 안 개워치말 하다 미고봉 토고 있네 괜찮아 토비야 된다라 냠는 류류가 신유지 주름 숨고래 안 진배 냠는 저 쇠배 냠는 저래 안 준의 냠는 저 몰람답 몰란티만 봐 삼자가 됐다 디냠네 저거래 나 제디 다디 결혼 띵 해봤잖아 는 den주류된 톱되어요 그래서 내 den주류된 데를 톱네 띵데를 냠네진데 제 투부에서 된 저한테 는 결혼 다디는 맞제베네 제마 저거스네 시루는 제 고거라고 말해 미다 말해서 두스 소야디 어디 소야디다 기부 중의 뭐에게 기부 중 뭐에게다 최고 최소에 최자고래.
To look at the genuine lesser spiritual capacity, or the person of genuine lesser spiritual capacity. So this practitioner can be referred to in two ways. One, exactly as in the text here, or it can be called someone of mere lesser spiritual capacity, or this word mere can be translated as only or alone. So someone of lesser spiritual capacity alone. So that's a different way to say someone of genuine lesser spiritual capacity. So we may hear that it's said differently. This person will have come to recognize, based on teachings just like you've been receiving over the last few months, that this life that we've achieved is quite remarkable. Independence on causes that I've accumulated in past lives, causes of the ethical restraint of restraining my body and speech, as well as practicing generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, and making prayer. Through all those causes, I've achieved these 8 freedoms and 10 endowments. This rebirth, which has such great value because it can achieve similar causes again to ensure another good rebirth. But this rebirth is not to be taken for granted because it was achieved with difficulty. All those causes had to be accumulated. Therefore, I must ensure that in this life I have as of my focus to restrain my physical and verbal behavior and thereby be ethical, to practice generosity again, to be patient again as in previous lives, so to enjoy perseverance and make prayer. So in this way, achieve causes that will lead to further excellent rebirths, further precious human rebirths. So those are the practices that this person recognizes they've engaged in the past, in past lives, and must engage in again in this life for the purpose of, or for the goal of, ensuring that in their future rebirths, they once again achieve higher status, or that rebirth in the higher realms, or rebirth as a human or God. That and that alone is the motivation, though. The motivation is only as far as next life. But those practices are those same 5. But their motivation is solely to achieve a further good rebirth.
어디니게 기부 하다미 원디고 반삼 토베게 되는 송시부 취디 기부 충의 취에서 최소한테 최호르체 나데네 가서 그런 기와 치마 당 원디고 반삼 돈돈이르체 안디 다데네 원디고 반삼 토고도 선비게 삼바 따지기 쫌마 많이 버르시 데네게 베디 토고 선비 거라 둔바 숙치 못 게제 안디 돈달라 안디 짐베 냠내지야 수제 냠내지야 쇠베 냠내지야 준제 냠내지야 안디 몰람도 스타비아다 안디 지게 덴쇼 된차와다 안디 지와 미다바 데네 삼다와이나 데니게 삼다야기 냠내기 짐바텔라다 기부 충유 람이린 바스월다 기부 충유 람이린 바스 데소게 차상라 기부 충유 람세월 기부 충유 람 기부 충유 람마도 람군에 말해 돼서 대기 돼서 민기부 충유 람신 민가서 람시가서 뭔디고 고번 토에게 탑람 냠내니다 기부 충유 람세데 민 람세 기부 충유 람민다 람군에 대해서 람군에 말해서 내지 기부 충우지 기부 충문에 되지 그런 게 냠내제가 돼 냠내 림바데 기부 충유 람세 아니 되네게 디 냠내제 림바 송에게 송 상유 송디 기부 충유 최고로서 최송제 기부 충유 최송 최세 어디래.
So when such a genuine lesser spiritual a person of genuine lesser spiritual capacity has as when their determination for further good rebirths is uncontrived, in other words, they don't need to intentionally generate it, it spontaneously arrives, then they are suitable to be called a practitioner of genuine spiritual capacity who is engaging in the path of a practitioner of small capacity. So when such a person, so the key distinction Geshe is making now is that their determination is uncontrived. Then, when they engage in ethics, generosity and so forth, they are engaging in the path of a practitioner of small capacity. What needs to be said though, whilst this is called a path of small or initial capacity, it is not an actual path. It is, etymologically named a path. It's merely called a path, but it's not an actual mental path. But when their motivation is uncontrived, then they are and their practices are those of a path of small capacity, although it's not an actual path, merely called the path.
지상은저 람세리 근데 진마 조사데 멜론 조사 람라도 람가 되는 마도는 멜론 리고로와 멜론 조사 람라고로와 디나신 다디디 군로디 느끼고 충 원되고 뭐 토고도 선배 군내라 군내 되니게 톱되게 되냐기 된바 쥐마 많이 받게 디던달이야 아니 진바다 추름소 세보고 디 냠는 디제도 냠는 디제발라 때나 갈리게서는 기부 충 가송 개와지만 원dio 고방 레투고로 하자 개부 중요 람세데 개부 중요 원dio 고방 델야 레투야게 냠리 림바엔자 콜 개부 중요 람습니다 고로다 람세야데.
This term we often hear path is used because it is what links from a current position to a desired position. So if one was wanting to go from here to Melbourne, one would go via, well, we wouldn't say path, we'd then say road, but we'd go via road to Melbourne. That road is the means by which we achieve our desired destination of Melbourne. So the word, unfortunately, in Tibetan for path and road is the same, but if one has this motivation to arrive at the destination of a further good rebirth, the means by which one goes from this rebirth to another good rebirth is by embarking on a journey along a particular path. Here, the paths refer to mental states, of course. So by cultivating mental states or paths, that is the means by which one arrives at the desired objective or destination.
나 기부 중원의 투모에게 최세 최송의 최대 투모하다 기부 중원의 투모의 최송의 최대 가르세네 다 기부 중원의 투모와 최송사 강사디 강사 간주어서네 고 아니 하나 tarbi고 뭐 토야기 되녀 봐지 다들 남규래 기야 말에 제하나 하나 상기고 뭐 토야기 그저 냠랭기 상기고 뭐 토되기 되녀 좀 봐지 제자다 다 탈바다 탐지 캠페인 애래 고마 땅애래 탈바 탐지 캠페인 고마 토고도 삼제 안디 기부 토고 삼베 삼로 유딩인제 되니 좀 봐지 대 토되기 되니 좀 봐봐 대라 람라 냠랭지 좀 봐지 이나다 콜 dimbasin dönyer yu dimba. Chesna tarpada tamje kimbe ngele tobyage dönyer yu dimba yebaje. De to gu sambe din de to gu sambe dönyer dimba yebaje. Dene dimba yebaje de ina da kol lamsa an din za kol ya an dangbo an dene ge dönyer yu kan gasa del ya ko lam yule ge ya mar da de ngi chon samba yuni ma ge ro 마게선 콜 당보 안다 냠는지 림바 당보 갈 때서 오다교는 다지게 단주류제데 된다 침보래 기 침보래 언제 체델이야 교는 된텔이야 다들 곰 냠는 제베는 제고고래 세데 단주류디 모여서야다 마할랍시제 되네 기체와 모두송 제사다 된텔이야 아니 교는 가서래 가르고모래세네 아니 주름소야다 진바다 쇠바다 되 냠는 제고래 세데 가서래 몰람 답이야다 개고 되니게 냠는 저 대체del이야 항상 탈바 탐지 기고 고바토 모든 개와 치마에나 된델이 냠는 제고 가지고 고거래서 되니게 누우시네 안지게 마소야게 된 소야디 가르송 거라서네 코론 가사 코론라 가르요라서네 코론 되냐기 듬바데 멜레 탈바 탐지 고고 김비 고바 토야기 되냐기 듬바 여바제 아니 디냠네 제야 되바 여바제 달라메야 디켄지 코로나야 안 탈비게 탈바 탐지 김고 마토야 되냐를 쥐메요 봐 데리야 취냠네 듬버요 봐 하고 해도 라미마 취 송뒤 당보 레라와디 파송 냠네 제주 데네마 림바진네 야할 다야 요로와 데네 자 당보는 기부 중요함지 봐 기회신 대소 검야다 기부 가서래 가서 데네 단주류데 뭐 송야 단주 된체와 안에 톱가와 임바삼다나 안디 단주 토연주 안에 류가이스 예지도 추춤소야다 진바다 쇠바다 전제 삼대 데스 가서 진바다 전제 몰란다 발어서 냠는 제고레신 데스 냠는 제고레신 송여도 데디 기부 중오다 저 투모에 남지림바 지산 냠는 제셔서 송예기 최디 송예디 가르스네 지와 가소레 다주 된체와다 안에 지 단주 리된 다주 된체와 다주 톱과와서 삼다나 냠는 제고래서다 안에 주름소의 릉아스 예주된 주름소야 진배 쇠바 전주 안에 지금 몰람 자고래서데 대시 기부 중으로 송다데 지부 지게를 임바지라 공로라 송사 강사 코롱 안에 예 달바 탐지 캠페 냠는 제 돈여기 좀 보여 돼 봐지 남에야 디켄체네 onko 탈바다 탐지 캠페 람냠는 제발라 니리 디제바는 제를 야가 자고 두그래 선배 내니게 남에게 되네 공마시에제 콜리아 땡여도 송야 지바 임바다 송사 가사 카하 미유 카하 차바자 안데 지게 디기부 중다 투모알람이래 되니가 송예게 송디 다 최디 투모에 최고르서로 진짜 투모에 최고르서 가선 지원에 주름 소야 진바 서버 전에 기부 중은 잠기나 디냠네 제고고래 코로나야 되는 냠네 제고 니가 냠네 제고 봐 지바 인자 냠네 제서 지바서 투모 와서 제사 투모에 최고르 디니게 람기 냠는 제게다 그런 게 되는 냠는 제게 림바지어로 지 수름 소야 진바나야 쇠배 냠는 제야 안전주 좀야 몰람 제지 여러 와디 지원미다 봐 삼다 람디요 냠는 제 림바지어로 안디 기부 중어다 투모에 람기 림바서 기부 중어다 투모에 람기 람레스 거들
So we have here, so read from this paragraph again, from the beginning. All the teachings that pertain to accomplishing the first level are included in the cycle of Dharma teachings for the person of genuine lesser spiritual capacity. So that person we've now spoken about. So now to talk about the second type of person. So also but referring to the same cycle of Dharma teaching. So the second type of person is that is shared in common with a person of lesser capacity. So this refers to the trainings which are shared with a practitioner of lesser or initial capacity. So such a person has a very different motivation from the person just described, the person of genuine lesser genuine lesser spiritual capacity. Their motivation was just to achieve a good rebirth. But someone who has heard far more teachings and been touched by those teachings, inspired by those teachings, and wants to give rise to the goals that we had above it of definite goodness. And as we'll see later in the text, definite goodness is of two types. One is that of liberation from samsara, or full and complete enlightenment. Both are included in definite goodness. So a practitioner who has the final goals of the Dharma, the goals of lasting happiness as their objective, but is starting out on their training, this is where they start, with the trainings which are shared with the practitioner of initial capacity. So these two types of persons have very different motivations. How they get to this point is also quite different. What is exactly the same, though, are the particular trainings. So their motivation, that hopefully is clear, that is very different. How they got to this point is also different in that the person who is engaging in the trainings shared with a practitioner of initial capacity, they know or have heard much more Dharma, hence they have given rise to the goal of liberation or enlightenment. Not necessarily they've heard much more Dharma, but they've been touched by that Dharma, and therefore they have a deep wish to achieve liberation and enlightenment. That is their actual goal that they are striving for. But they are not, where they are in their training is right here, is engaging in the trainings which are common or shared with a person of initial or lesser capacity. And these are the same trainings we've just heard before. Engaging in the ethical restraint of abandoning non-virtuous physical and verbal behavior, engaging in generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, and making excellent prayers. All of these are done with the greater motivation, the motivation of either liberation from the sufferings of samsara or full and complete enlightenment. So the motivation is different, but their trainings are the same. And the further key point to understand, the reason why this practitioner, despite having this great goal of liberation or enlightenment as their objective, the reason why they are training here in these practices which are shared with a practitioner of initial capacity is so that they can develop the strength and skill of mind that is suitable to progress in the graduated sequence of trainings. because by focusing on these trainings, their mind will become broad and expansive. They will be not overwhelmed anymore by common problems, common pleasures, but their mind will be focused on the Dharma. That training, developing the mind to be focused on the Dharma, starts here. First, one reflects on this precious human rebirth, reflecting, I have achieved all these freedoms and endowments. I have the potential, that's the first outline. The second outline, I have the potential with this rebirth to achieve liberation or enlightenment. I must not let it go to waste. I mustn't be like a traveler to an island of jewels who leaves empty-handed. I mustn't be like an animal following my desires and so forth. Those illustrations from that outline. But I mustn't also take this life for granted. It was difficult to obtain, so few have it. So that foundation, what we've just been hearing, is where the practitioner who has a yearning for liberation or enlightenment starts to train. And they will build on with that, with the trainings that are to come. So therefore, such a practitioner will meditate on their precious human rebirth, as well as ethics, generosity, patience, a joyous perseverance, and making prayer, but with a goal of enlightenment. And again, this is of great importance to do, even if you have a goal of enlightenment, so as to develop a mind that is focused on the Dharma, a mind that does not get absorbed in mundane affairs, but easily lets them go.
안다나 라도 기부 중의 람세다 기부 중다 투모의 람세디다 개발로치 니레도 하지다데 기부 중 람세도 다 가사 냠는지 가사 코로 개와치마 하다 미고바 잠원도 고바 잠마도 탈바다 삼지기 미고바 토외기 된들 되년 매바지 원도 고바 잠 토외 된들 열전에 다 진바단 수림 쇠바 전주 되내기 냠는지에게 내 냠는데라 기부 중의 람세 실와다 대 기부 중의 람세 되는지 되라 다 기부 중의 람세 가사 코롱의 되내기 가사 유기다 냠내기 좀 받으라 기부 중의 람세 나 기부디 가사 코롱기다 개와 지게 탈바다 탐지 캠비 고바 다들 코롱리아 람규를 깨매나야 코롱 안에 야나 답이 고바 토야기 돈이를 여바제 야나 탐지 캠비 고바 토야기 돈이를 좀 여바제 디 토야기 돈이 전에다 딩이 냠는 디 토야기 냠는 지긴 샘피 삼당이도 디네게 냠는 지에게 군로 여바지라 안디 돈달라 안 당보 안 지게 미다바 가서 다지 된 차와다 안 지게 미다바 가서래 치와 미다바 삼다야 디니 추르미소야 진바 서버 전주 아 어두스는 냠는지에다게다 기부 중후다 투모의 람스 람스오다 군로 가사 코롱기 가사 코롱리아 탈비고 봐 토야게 되니 좀 봐봐 야나 탐지 캠비고 봐 토야게 되니 좀 봐봐 디니게 좀 봐 주의비 토는 냠는지에게 시긴선비 미유 디네샤제 안 진바다 가서 진바도 출연 서버 전에 냠는 제기 좀 받이다 기부 중원의 투모의 람세데 두신당한테 기부 중원의 람나 기부 중원의 투모의 람세 두시야와 제야디 다 두신에 리도와
So in conclusion, or to conclude this point, to look at the similarity and the differences between these two types of practitioners of initial capacity. So someone who is a person of genuine lesser spiritual capacity, they will have a determination to ensure that they achieve another good rebirth, just like this. They've come to value and recognize and value this rebirth and are determined to ensure another excellent rebirth. So that is their motivation. And this is a strong and abiding motivation, not just a fleeting thought, but a strong and abiding motivation. And with that, they engage in the 5 trainings of reflecting on this, or in addition to reflecting on the precious and human rebirth, they reflect on ethical restraint of one's body and speech, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, and prayer. So those are their trainings. The practitioner who has a far greater goal of liberation or enlightenment, the two types of definite goodness, they have this far vaster motivation. But in order to actually achieve that goal, they need to establish the right foundation. They need to develop a mind that is focused on the Dharma, and to do so, they start training here by reflecting on their precious human rebirth through those 3 outlines of recognizing that the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments have been achieved, and that these have the great value of being able to achieve liberation or enlightenment based on this very precious human rebirth, but that this was something difficult to achieve, and it was difficult to achieve from both the perspective of causes and result. Then, having done that meditation, they then, in that meditation, meditate on the same 5 practices: ethical restraint, of restraining one's physical and verbal behavior, generosity, patience, joy, perseverance, and prayer. So with both of these practitioners, the meditation's the same. Reflection on precious human rebirth, and then those 5 practices. Those 5 practices which create the causes for further good rebirth. But their motivation for doing so is vastly different. So this then is the difference between a person of genuine lesser capacity and the person that is shared in common with a person of lesser capacity.
다 기부 충원은 투모에 남기는 바 냠내 지겐 다 기부들라 야 릭니 용거와 근데 개와 제가 타르바 토고도 스타 타르지 탐지 김에 산여 고모 세딩이 토에 깔래 하고 해야 되데 톱투사 말에 나 타르바 세디 코르 동안 타르고도 타르바 콘 요몽바 사본나 제바 빵베 빵바 타르바도 토고도 샘비게 타르바 되녀 여바체 이난 람귤라 기메 바체 제가 데니기 되녀 여되겐 가사 찍려야 아니 다데 기부 중요해 람 제 진바다 치워메다 바고며 댄주류 된차와다 녀가와 데데고며 아니 지게 다데 진바도 수련서바 전주 아니 지게 대소 냠내린 바데 기부 중원의 투모알람이린 바 냠람디 기부 중원의 투모알람이린 바체 아니 그런 가사 대야 아니 그런기 개와치마라 원주에 잠마인바 타르비고 봐도 통이 여바제 아니 산제고 봐 토야기다 미디딩에 토토고 말해서 베게다 진짜 탐지기 먹고 뭐 토야 돈이 매야 되게 가서 지금으로 와 그냥 가서 지금 다 지게 코에 타는 코에 동안 타다를 저고 디마세 랑지 마세 샘전 탐지 코에 동안을 저고도 진짜 디인자 산제고 뭐 토고도 샘베 탐지기 먹고 뭐 돈이 열세 되네 될 안지기 되네게 야 지금 냠는 지야디 되지 기부 충혈람이 좀 냠는 지야지 어봐 진짜 기부 충혈이 기부 충다 투모와 람이rin 바 냠는 지게 가사 될라야 릭니 찍디 아니 타르바잠 돈이 되겠지 안 찍디 아니 고려동아 타다를 저지 산지고 뭐 토야지 돈이 되겠 가사를 마서는 이용으로 여와 제베나
to speak briefly on the difference between the 2 types of motivations relating to definite goodness. So that has the 2, one of liberation, one of enlightenment. So for the practitioner who's engaging in the training shared with the practitioner of initial capacity, they will have one of these 2 as their objective, as their goal, liberation or enlightenment. So those who have liberation as their goal, they will consider enlightenment as just being too difficult, as something that requires far too much time and effort, but their own liberation they see as very achievable and what they will strive for. So liberation refers to having reflected on the sufferings of samsara in detail, coming to recognize there is nothing pleasurable worth striving for in samsara. There's no happiness that's worth striving for as long as one remains bound in samsara, because that happiness will never last. Also, one recognizes that one only experiences suffering in samsara, and the suffering comes from our afflictions and contaminated karma. And recognizing that when one gains freedom from one's afflictions and contaminated karma, one gains freedom from suffering, liberation from suffering, liberation from samsara. That is their goal, and they strive for that. And to have a sufficient mind that is focused solely on the Dharma, that is not distracted by life's meaningless affairs. They engage in these practices. They reflect on the precious human rebirth and then meditate on ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, and make prayer. The other type of goal from definite goodness, that of enlightenment, the practitioner has gone through the same meditations on recognizing the sufferings of samsara and the causes of the sufferings of samsara, and given rise to that wish to gain freedom from their own afflictions together with their seeds. But they don't see the attainment of enlightenment as too difficult, as too much hard work. That is where they differ from that other type of practitioner of a definite goodness. What they see as difficult is leaving others behind while they strive for their own interest. They recognize, or they see, how can I pursue my own interest whilst ignoring others? This is what they see as difficult. So therefore, they want to become Buddhas for the sake of others. But in order to have a mind focused on the Dharma, a mind, again, not overcome by worldly concerns, they engage in these trainings, reflect on their precious human rebirth, then on ethics, generosity, patience, joyous perseverance, and prayer.
안저 투모에 잘할수록 투모에 잘라 제가 미니게 투모에 잘라서 근데 잘라디 결혼 레베스는 레레그로와 코에 레베스는 레레그로와 다 코에 아래 녀랑 니가 그래서 투모하세요다 디잘라데 투모하세요로와 당스로와 모ral 마스네 미니게 투모에는 결혼 레베스는 갈 모라여서 안절이 교회 레베스는 녀리아래 코에 아래서 나니가 레스라 제상아저 지상 잘라 투모하세요 투가니 투모에 모라레라네 모라디 니가 베지 다쳐야 니가 와쳐야 돼 봐지 지사데 미수키스티 모라디 교라레베는 게 레레그로와 파조코 레베는 코야 레레그로와 레레그로와 어디 니가 인고도와 아주 지단계다 지딘베 투모에 잘라서 니가 인바지 다데 기부 충원의 투모에 남세도와 디기부 충원의 투모에 남데 기부 충원에 남 레벨은 말이라고 그러다 기부 충원에 남 말이디 기부 충원의 투모에 남레마데 기부 충원의 투모 기부 충을 남라 말해서 투모와서디 코로니가 임비 김세진 투모를 라고 말때 가서 잘라 미니가 니가 임비 김세진 투모를 라고 말 투모와서디 니가 냠소디 랭고 반사 냠소 랭고 바 찍바 인자 니가 냠소 랭고 바서 투모와서 투모를 남이린 바스 마도 기부 충을 투모를 남이린 바서디 코로게 냠소 렘바나지 기부 충을 디기게 디 냠소 랭고로 봐 코로나 냠소 렘바 저부인자의 투모를 남기는 바마도 기부충의 투모를 남디 기부충의 남 레베스는 말해라고 그러다. 야디 고토야게 아주
To talk a little further on this expression, trainings shared with the practitioner of initial capacity. So this term shared or common, in common, the way we use it in society is that term is the same as is used here. So two people can have an object in common, or they can share an object. They can share a car or have the use of a particular car in common. So they'll both say, yes, that's the car I use. And the two of us, we share this car or we have it in common. So this is the way the word share or in common is used in society. And that's the same here. But what misunderstanding to avoid is that a practitioner or a person who's engaging in the trainings shared with a practitioner of initial capacity, they are not cultivating a path of initial capacity. So they may be engaging in the trainings shared with a practitioner of initial capacity, but they're not cultivating a path of initial capacity. They are sharing they are engaging in common practices or practices they have in common with someone of initial capacity, but they themselves are not cultivating a path of initial capacity. So for them, So for those who are engaging in the training shared with the practitioner of initial capacity, they are not generating an actual path of initial or lesser capacity.
지게 산지 유선의 최리 샘쟁기 던두비에게 최도 송고래 샘쟁이 된데 가라서네 타도 가는 겔레고 말이래 내가 안에 나서가 동안에 타지 원조고 말이래 원조고 톱텔에 디기 두비래 제사 디고 송에 디 톱이게 된다 송샤바 짱짱 차거래 디네 인자다 기보숨이 람냠 산지 송비 최간에시나 기보숨이 람냠리 림바 송바디나레 뒤로래 사지 어두신다 뒤다디 하고 와제 근데 가지고다 기보 중후세야디 기보 중후세야디 기보 중후세야디 간이 람세야디 간이실라고래 다 기보 중후다 투모에 람세야디 데니시레 세대가도 딩오와디 모트에디 야세고 자고 자제 어두신데 데리기 데데샤.
So then tonight we looked at how all of the Buddha's teachings are included within the teachings that pertain to the three types of persons, those of initial, intermediate, and greatest capacity. And that and another way to look at it, that all the teachings are from the Buddha, all of them were directed towards the attainment of the two goals, that of higher states or definite goodness. And whilst all the Buddha's teachings are directed towards the attainment of those two goals, it really comes down to the one, that of enlightenment. But all of the Buddha's teachings, then, we see are included here. And then, moreover, we looked at, that was that first paragraph, then in the second, we looked at the two types of practitioner of initial capacity. And we had the person of actual lesser spiritual capacity and the person shared in common, or their training shared in common with a person of lesser capacity. So hopefully the difference between those two is also clear. Okay, then thank you very much.